Halo is a franchise that is in an incredibly complicated position, so I think it's important to briefly recap my history with the franchise so you know where I'm coming from. I grew up with the original Xbox. Some of my earliest memories are Halo, and it's largely responsible for getting me as into games as I am now. Halo CE, 2, and 3 I all love. They're true classics that I regularly come back to, and on any given day, I could make the argument that any one of them is the best of the three. While I've played it the least, I'm also a big fan of ODST's totally different perspective and ambience. Then Reach. I had issues with it back in 2010, primarily with the multiplayer, as a lot of people did. Coming back to it now, it's quite good with the title update tweaks, and while I think the campaign is missing that extra something, it's still great and was a nice send-off to the series for Bungie. Then 343 Industries took over and dropped Halo CE Anniversary, which I thought and still think is not good, and a year after that, Halo 4, which I didn't like on day one and like even less now. Next came the catastrophically broken MCC version 1.0, followed up by Halo 5. Now this is where my opinions begin to diverge from the mainstream. While I agree that Halo 5's campaign was easily the worst in the series, I had a blast with the multiplayer. Not the Warzone Requisition Pack stuff, but the basic bitch arena modes. I can understand why it was controversial. Left trigger ADS and enhanced mobility in a Halo game seemed like a big middle finger to Halo fans, but it was extremely well executed, and the even starts arena style that was beginning to be eroded in 4 was fully restored. Regardless of my opinions, 5 was not well received, and it's been over 5 years since it was released. Infinite was positioned as a clean break from that, a sort of soft reboot of the series to right the wrongs of the past 2 games. Hopes were high until last year when a lackluster gameplay reveal gave way to a year-long delay not too long after. Infinite is in a difficult place to say the least. Not only is it coming off of the most hated game in the series and a clearly last-minute delay, but 343 also have the unenviable task of making a game that has to be all things to all people. It has to win back older fans that felt scorned by 4 and 5, and serve as an entry point for new players, especially younger ones. So that means it needs to be new and fresh, because we already have the MCC, but don't make it too new and fresh because the old school fans hated that. Oh, and it also has to be a big hit, since it's the flagship title for the Xbox Series consoles, which, as of yet, haven't had any true AAA exclusives. So, no pressure. I won't even entertain the idea that it's possible to balance all that. It's not, but personally, I'm not all that invested in Infinite. I'm happy with the Halo games we already have. I don't really crave more, so I'm mostly indifferent to what 343 does. If it's good, great. If not, life goes on. But on an industry level, it feels incredibly important, and with the delay, the departure of multiple key figures, and the reports about this being a $500 million game, I've been curious to find out what the hell is going on with this huge project that we really haven't seen much of, with a release date that is allegedly coming soon. Fortunately for me, that curiosity was satiated. I was lucky enough to be among the first to go hands-on with Infinite during this weekend-long technical preview that consisted of 4v4 Slayer against bots on 3 maps, although they did enable PvP for about 2 hours, which I did get to play. So, here's what I thought.
Oh, that rattled them good, eh?
I hate to do this, but I have to start off with some technical complaints. They intentionally avoided using the word beta and were crystal clear about this being an early build to temper expectations, and I can understand why they did that because the game was hard to run. I've got a 3090 and 5900X playing at 4K, and I had to dial back settings and scale my resolution down to about 60% just to get around 80 to 90 FPS, which is not great, but again, early build, that's nothing out of the ordinary. What I did find distressing is that even at those relatively high frame rates, aiming, both with mouse and controller, did not feel smooth to me. It certainly didn't feel like the frame rates I was getting. You could only play in borderless full screen, which I thought might have been the culprit, but G-Sync was working just fine, so I don't know. To me, this is a huge problem. This thing needs to be buttery smooth, and it's not. Whatever the issue is, they need to address it. Then the visuals. Based on the trailer, it was looking alright. Again, I played most of this with pretty pared back settings, but I wouldn't say this is a particularly amazing or bad looking game. The lighting definitely looks nice, but I'm not seeing crazy amounts of geometry or anything else that screams out to me as being next gen. This is a cross-gen game and it's multiplayer, so it's not really an issue for me, but I just wanted to point it out because I've seen some people infatuated with it, and that was not my impression. With that out of the way, let's get down to business. The core gameplay feels extremely tactile and satisfying. Your character is grounded in the physical space. Melee hits are concussive, grenade throws feel out of this world, and the time to kill felt ever so slightly lower than the classic Halo games, at least enough to make the AR a viable killing machine, and I liked that. Even with a mouse and keyboard, this connection to what was happening on screen was coming through, which is often not the case. Of course, all that is ultimately an illusion. It's an intricate balancing act of statistical damage output, first-person animations, and sound design, and they've just completely nailed it here. The bread and butter weapons are all enjoyable, save for that full auto DMR, which kind of sucks. The Needler is now sort of a power weapon, and it's great. Likewise, the Gravity Hammer, which was more of a utility or gimmick weapon in older games, has a heft and power behind each swing. The Covenant Carbine, which always felt redundant, is out and replaced by the Pulse Carbine, which is a burst-fire weapon with mild tracking. I think it needs more tuning, but it's not a horrible idea, and I appreciate their attempts at freshening up some of the more stale aspects of the weapon sandbox. The Banished weapons are more of a mixed bag. They didn't seem that powerful, though I didn't get to spend much time with them. And this has nothing to do with gameplay, but I have to mention that it's something of a fashion disaster to see these Hollywood sci-fi style new weapons next to super faithful renditions of classics like the AR and BR. The gameplay foundation here is strong and has a very direct feeling to it. When you go back and play the classic Halo games, even with a mouse and keyboard, they have a more floaty, disconnected quality to them, as is typical with traditional Doom-inspired shooters. Despite its ostensibly throwback style, Infinite is a much more modern game in that regard, but it's not reminiscent of COD. It's trying to give the impression of a 7-foot-tall guy in a 2-ton suit. Some might lament that it doesn't feel like old Halo, but I like it, and I think the vast majority of players will be down with it as well. But the thing is, these gameplay attributes aren't unique to Infinite. For the most part, 343 already achieved this with Halo 5, the irony. Where Infinite, at least in this early build, begins to fall apart for me is with the higher level design choices. It's not that they're bad, it's that they're incredibly passive and add up to a game that doesn't feel particularly distinct, so let me explain that. This is basically Halo 5 with almost all of that game's defining features removed. The enhanced mobility mechanics like dashing, ground pounding, and floating in the air are gone, and the speed of the game is significantly slowed, but there are still bits of Halo 4 and 5 DNA floating around in here. Sliding and clambering are back, no issues there, but they decided to keep Sprint, which is bizarre to me since Sprint has been one of, if not the most controversial part of 343 Halo. But fret not, seemingly the compromise was to make Sprint slow, really slow, to the point where it might as well not even be in the game. Unlike 5, shields can recharge while sprinting, but you're so slow and vulnerable due to the lengthy weapon ready animation that it's not going to turn the tides of an engagement. 5's most controversial feature, left trigger ADS on all weapons, also makes a return. That means all the weapons with scopes behave like they have in all Halo games, but scopeless weapons like the AR receive a 1.4 times zoom. Again, for a game that's supposed to be going back to the roots, I find it interesting that they've kept this mechanic that the Bungie Halo games famously excluded. But the reality is that, just like Sprint, it doesn't make a massive impact on gameplay. Halo 5 was fast, so the ADS served the purpose of slowing the game down. It's a solution to a problem that Infinite's sandbox doesn't have. I rarely used the 1.4 times ADS, and the more I played, the less sprinting I did. The game didn't seem to punish me for neglecting two of its bigger mechanics, so why are they here? My theory is that it's more of a mental thing for new players. They included Sprint and ADS to make players who are used to modern shooters like COD more comfortable, but then tuned them in a way that makes it possible for Halo guys like myself to play as if they're not there. That seems like a stretch, but I don't know what else the explanation could possibly be. Infinite's biggest gameplay flourish is easily the equipment system, which is like a remixed version of what was in Halo 3. All power-ups like active camo and overshields are now banked items that can be activated whenever you please, and there's a smattering of new, more conventional equipment. There's a radar shot, which is straight out of COD, a really wimpy shield, and then the grappling hook. The grappling hook is the obvious standout. It's very fun, but none of these radically transform you. It's just extra garnishing at best and a distraction at worst. The maps continue this theme of being just innocuous, sterile mush. Live Fire was easily the worst. It's like they took a tutorial training area and turned it into a map. The other two were the definition of inoffensive. One is in New Mombasa, it's the nicest looking, for sure, and the other is some kind of industrial facility. Maps are a big part of Halo's identity, and while they obviously will bring back some classics as is tradition, this is a new game, so I'd like to see some more personality both in visual design and layout. The final thing is completely unrelated, but I have to talk about it. There's all this dialogue that happens in these matches, and it's horrible. You've got the Spartans talking to each other, saying shit like, over yonder. Then you have these new companion AI characters that have witty comments and call out things like power weapon spawns. It is atrocious. I absolutely hate it. And it makes the game feel like some cheap knockoff mobile game for no good reason. There's an audio glitch, 343 is aware of it, but pretty much all you hear is dialogue, so take a listen for yourself.
Damage.
Overshield acquired. Shields boosted.
Enemy Spartans are closing in.
Good kill.
Tagged one.
Spartan down.
Over yonder.
This shit is grating. I was tired of it after only a few hours of playing, so I can only imagine a month, 6 months, a year of hearing all this. It has got to go.
Double kill. Triple kill. Killing frenzy.
What are my takeaways from this technical preview? Well, I'm not entirely sure what to think. I can say with certainty that it's not a disaster, it's an alright game, but that's not the bar for this. This is a hugely important game for Xbox 343 and Halo. It needs to be a big blowout success, and despite some of the positive buzz, I'm not seeing that, and it's hard to imagine this having significant staying power in the hyper-competitive multiplayer space. While I haven't had a chat with them, I can also say that the game plays like it was made by people who are deeply hesitant. I get the impression that this is not 343's vision. It's just not possible that this is anyone's vision. It's a set of compromises and avoidances. This is 343 walking on a thin sheet of ice, trying to please different audiences at the same time. It's easy to understand how they got to this point. It's a direct consequence of Halo having a rough time for nearly a decade, but seldom does good work emerge from an insecure approach. It is not possible to please everyone, especially with Halo, and I think that's honestly what they're attempting here. The best you can do is be inoffensive to everyone. That's what this is, and it's a complete waste if you ask me. This is where we enter my personal paradox with Halo. I have issues with what they've come up with, but I don't have an alternative to propose. If I was able to change things, I would remove the 1.4 times ADS outright and remove sprint, but make the standard walking speed 10% faster to compensate. The issue is, if you do that, you're left with Halo 3 made with Halo 5, and there's no point in that. We have the MCC. So I guess that means my suggestion would be to make something wild and different, but they already did that with 5, and everyone hated it. Except for the people who see this as the second coming of Halo, this is one of those rare times where I understand everyone's perspective. I get why people hated 5. I understand why 343 made this the way that it is, but I'm not going to sit here and make excuses for this game and pretend that I loved what I played. It's kind of boring, uninspired, and I'm struggling to see what's on offer here. We live in a world where all the Halo games are accessible on modern machines with a healthy player base, and outside of Halo, there's Warzone, Apex Legends, the new Battlefield, and a whole multitude of other shooters, many of which are frankly more exciting than this. Based on what I played, I don't think Infinite is going to re-establish Halo's dominance, but I've been wrong before. If you were lucky enough to get into this Don't Call It a Beta, let us know what you thought. If not, better luck next time, I guess. Until next time, thanks for watching.